So today in the MasterMind group, I want to talk a little bit about being held hostage. I think I find a lot of times that owners are held hostage by their fears, by the lies they tell themselves, and also by bad habits that they form. And so I want to talk about just the fear portion of it today. We'll cover the lies and the bad habits next time. But I found it really interesting. My pastor did a series of something similar like this in our church. And he said there's only two natural born fears that we have when we're young. And first one is fear of loud noises. And the second one is the fear of falling. Well, if that's true, if we're only born with two fears naturally, where does all the rest of them come from? And I think what you find that a lot of our other fears come from, they're learned, and they come from our experiences. And so a lot of the other things that we're afraid of in our life that hold us back from achieving all the things that we could, we've learned them or we've had some experience that caused us to be afraid to repeat that. And so today I want to dive a little bit into fear. So originally, hundreds of years ago, fear had a natural place in that as we were out there on the plains or being a pioneer crossing the country, fear had a natural role in that it helped us to recognize danger. And one of the things that it would also do is give you a rush of adrenaline or give you that boost when you had to do the fight or flight. Well, we don't live 100 years ago. We don't have a lot of the natural things like wild animals and Indians and things of that nature that we had to be afraid of, but yet we still get that boost of adrenaline. We still feel the tendency to want to fight or flight whenever we feel fear. And so what I'd like to talk about is really what is fear. So if I just put up here, spell it out for us, I'd like to look at it in a little bit different way. And that is that really, if you start thinking about it, fear a lot of the times is false expectations appearing real. So in other words, fear is a false expectation that appears real to us in our mind. In other words, it's imagined that if we do this, then we're going to get some real result. Jack Canfield in his book, The Success Principles, he also just changes up these first two, and he calls it fantasized experience appearing real. So in the same sense, we fantasize in our mind some experience that's going to happen to us if we do X. And so what that does is that causes the adrenaline, causes the fight or flight response, because it's all part of that fear. So, but fear is a natural part of what it is that we do. It's just, what do we do with it? How do we control it rather than letting it control us? And so what I'd like everyone to do in your handout today, you'll notice that there's a table there. And I know that introspection is difficult. It's hard sometimes to look at ourselves and really sit down and examine what it is that we're doing. But you'll see a table there, and the column on the left-hand side is fear. So in other words, what is it that you're afraid of in your work, in your life, whatever it might be? I'd like to take a couple of minutes and have everybody write down what some of their fears are. And in the right-hand column, you'll notice it says imagined outcome. So in other words, when I have that fear, what is it that I imagine is going to happen? And just to kind of help you out, to give you an example, I'll tell you about one of the things that bothers me, and that is follow-up calls. Not necessarily in the very beginning, but if I make a follow-up call and maybe send you a follow-up email, and I make one or two attempts to get hold of you, and I don't get a response, I immediately start to have anxiety and fear in that you're going to tell me no. Or if I use Jim as an example, and I send Jim, I make a phone call to Jim, and then I send him an email to follow up, and I made two attempts to reach out to him, and I don't get a response, I start thinking that I've done something, that Jim's angry with me, that maybe he's not going to renew his membership in the MasterMind group. And so what happens is I become reluctant to want to reach out and follow up with him a third or a fourth time. when in reality, so in other words, that's what I fantasize is going to happen, so it appears real to me. But what in reality is that Jim's probably on vacation, or Jim's just been very busy, or he didn't see my email, or there's some other reason that he isn't getting back to me. So what I'd like you to do is look at yourself, look at what some of the things are that you're afraid of, and put them down in the table. Left-hand side is what you fear. Right-hand side is your imagined outcome. So just take a couple of minutes and do that, and then we'll get back. So time's up. So did you find that hard, or did you find that easy? Typically, I think a lot of times people find it difficult to look at themselves and really look at what it is that they're afraid of. But in reality, you can't fix a problem until you identify it. So it's important that you do this. And we only had a few minutes here to do that. So I'm going to encourage you, and part of your assignment for next time is to spend a little more time on this and start filling it out. But see, if you really think about it, you can see how your imagination has a dark side. That dark side takes and twists this around on you so that all of a sudden there comes this ghastly image that you have in your mind of what's going to happen if you do what you fear. And so are we going to control our fear, or are we going to let it control you, control us? And so what I'd like to suggest is I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how you can deal with the things that you're afraid of. And so if you turn your handout over, you'll see on the back side that there's 3 tips here on how to conquer your fear, and there's actually a blank space in there. So I'm going to tell you what the number 1 is. So the very first one is for you to imagine something else. Okay? So instead of imagining this thing that's going to happen, this fantasized experience, instead imagine something else. So instead of imagining that I call Jim up and I get no response, or he tells me he's going to discontinue his membership in the group, instead I could imagine that he's just been really busy because business is so good that he just hasn't had time to give me a call back. I could imagine that he's been wanting to reach out to me and say yes, but yet he just hasn't had the time. So imagine something different. Visualize the successful result instead of the negative result. Okay? Start thinking about the benefits of just doing it anyway, even though you fear it. And start thinking about how it's going to feel, or how you're going to be rewarded by doing that thing that you fear. So that's number 1. Number 2 there is remember previous successes. So think about times when you've done that thing that you feared before, but yet it turned out okay. That this fantasized experience didn't happen. That instead Jim said yes, or your prospect said yes. Just imagine, think back to the times. How many times did you ask when you were maybe in college, high school, you wanted to ask the good-looking girl out, but you didn't because you were afraid that they were going to say no? Well, think about the times when you asked other women out and that worked out for you, that they said yes. And so remember your previous triumph or your previous success. That would be number 2. And the last one there, number 3, is scale down the risk. In other words, take that thing that you're afraid of and chunk it down into smaller pieces that are much more manageable. And then go do the easy one first, that thing that has very little risk. Because what happens if you do that and you're successful, imagine what would happen. Well, success breeds success. You're a lot more confident. You no longer have the fear. You're not feeling it. And so you do the next step and the next step, and pretty soon what happens is you've overcome that and you've become successful. So procrastination can only lead to more doubt and fear. So don't hold off, doing what it is that you're afraid of. Just go out and do it anyway. Feel the fear and do it anyway. So just in kind of closing, as I mentioned, I'd like you to finish out the table on the front page. Write down some other fears that you have and what your imagined outcome is. But as you're looking back at the ones that you either did during the session here or that you do later on, I would like you to ask yourself 3 questions. And so that I get this right, I'm just going to read them right from the paper here. So number 1 is this fear preventing me from achieving my dreams and goals? Is this fear preventing me from achieving my dreams and goals? Okay, so ask yourself that question on each of the fears that you have in your table. Number 2 here is, if I did this and failed, what's the worst thing that could happen? And then can I live with that consequence? So if I did it and I failed, what's the worst thing that could happen? And can I live with that? And number 3, the last one is, what's the best thing that could happen? And how would that make me feel? Okay. If you start looking at the things that hold you back in that way, I think you'll have a whole different outlook on it.